There's now a way to contact the Wolf Connection podcast. Send us an email to podcast@wolfconnection.org with your comments, questions, and guest ideas for Stephen and myself. You may hear your question answered on an upcoming podcast. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Calfa. Let's talk about some wolves. The Wolf Connection podcast has a special announcement. Our friends from the band Lost Walks have 2 live shows coming up on March 18th and 19th for the release of the next chapter in their rock opera series, Blood Lantern. If you're going to be in the Denver area, go to lostwalksband.com to purchase your seated or standing tickets for both shows at LFX Filmworks, located at 1701 31st Street in Denver, Colorado. Tickets start from $15 a piece with seated tickets, including 1 free Ratio beer or Dream Apothecary drink. The show is presented by Ratio Beer Works, Indie 102.3, and Drama Apothecary. Support these wonderful humans as they raise awareness, empathy, and action towards protecting wolves and help in the effort to return them to Colorado. Enjoy the show. By her own admission, she is the sheep and cattle boss of her ranch Grazery, located near High Prairie in Alberta, Canada. Louise Liebenberg, it's a pleasure to have you with Stephen and I. You were recommended to us, I believe, by Raymond Toney, who you spoke with, and it was so interesting to read your website and to really just get immersed in what you're doing. So first off, how are you doing? We spoke just a moment before. You said you had a little bit of a rough season, right? It's been snowing a lot up there.
Yes, it has been rough. Thank you for having me and inviting me on to your podcast. Yeah, it's been rough. We've had a pretty brutal winter with temperatures down to -40 for 3 weeks in a row. So it's been pretty rough.
Wow. Is that unusual?
That extent of time, yes. Usually we get -40 for 3-4 days, but then it warms up again. And we had 3 solid weeks of just absolute frigid temperatures. And then we went to +4 and then back down to -30. So it's been a really pretty rough winter in that way.
And yeah, I guess the topsy-turviness of the temperature doesn't help what you're doing and how you're trying to do things, right?
No, it certainly does. It really actually highlights a little bit of climate change that is happening because, man, it's been so volatile, the weather, put it that way.
Tell everybody exactly what it is that you do on your ranch, and we'll get into the history of it. But what exactly is your, what type of livestock do you have, and what's your focus?
Okay, so my daughter and I run a purebred and commercial Angus cattle operation. We have about 150 cows, and then the assorted calves and bulls, and the other animals around it. We run about 300 sheep as well. So that's our main source of income on the ranch. And then we have some miscellaneous animals like dogs and cats and horses and so on. But the livestock is the main core business.
And you said purebred cows. Why is that an important distinction in your industry?
Because we sell purebred bulls off the ranch, and we sell some purebred heifers. So it's just a different line of income. So we have the commercial non-registered cows and then the purebreds, which is sort of an additional side to the business.
Interesting. So tell everybody how you got to Canada, because you immigrated to North America. I believe it was 2007, 2008, I think, when you got your visa or everything approved, and you moved, and you said Canada was the way to go. But you had been ranching, I believe, across Europe, and you settled up in the Netherlands before that, prior, for, I believe, about 20 years prior. So just tell everybody your background and how you ended up starting to ranch and things like that.
Sure. So I was raised in South Africa, and I actually got into sheep farming in South Africa. And I went to university, did a Bachelor of Science at university there, with every intention of carrying on to veterinary school. Didn't get through all the selections. So eventually studied psychology, zoology, genetics, just sort of a random assortment of subjects. After I'd finished studying, I decided I wanted to see the world. So I took my sheepdog with me and I went over to Europe and I worked on multiple sheep and cattle ranches all over Europe. So in Belgium, Germany, Scotland,
Wow.
all over. Settled in the Netherlands, started up a grazing company there. So we did, I don't know what the North American term for it is, but it's like prescription grazing. So we got paid to graze certain areas with our sheep. And it was like places where tractors, for example, could not mow the grass. Our sheep would be able to go in and eat the grass short. So a lot of it was dike management, nature areas, military grounds, things like that, city parks, golf courses, things like that. So our sheep business expanded to about 1,200 ewes. We had 5 shepherds working for us. We started a shepherding school because we could not find qualified people to do the job. So we thought we better train them to do the job. So that's what we did for a long time. And then it was very successful, but I was hankering for more nature, more wildlife, more space. And so we emigrated to Canada and started up our sheep and cattle farm here. Have no employees now, so it's a whole lot less stress to deal with it. But that's how we ended up here in this remote area of northern Alberta.
Wow. So aside from the general animal husbandry part of all this, I stumbled across a blog where you're discussing the dogs you use for your ranching practices. Tell us about that. Do you breed them? What kind of dogs do you use? How many dogs do you have? And what's that whole process about?
Sure. So back in Holland, when we were doing all this prescription grazing, we were having a lot of trouble with primarily pet dogs attacking the sheep, damaging the sheep, killing sheep. And so we decided to look into using livestock guardian dogs. And there are about 40 different breeds of livestock guardian dogs, but my heart kind of settled on the former Yugoslavian mountain dog, the Shaplaninac. And so I acquired that breed and we used them back in the Netherlands. So when we emigrated over to Canada, we brought all the dogs with us because we realized our problems here in Canada with wolves will probably be a whole lot bigger than in the Netherlands with just pet dogs. So we brought our dogs with us and they have been really fantastic in helping keep predators away. So I do breed them. I don't breed very often. I kind of breed for what I need. And because they tend to have big litters, they always breed more than what I need. So I do sell them to other ranchers, other sheep farmers who could use a good guardian dog. So that's kind of the history of the dogs.
That's cool. How many of those dogs working together do you consider effective in terms of predators? And are these types of dogs, are they going to get into an altercation with a wolf and make it through it, or is the point that they're a deterrence?
So what we usually have, we have anywhere between 2 to 5 dogs in a specific area. So it really depends. Like we graze sometimes 30 kilometers away from home. So we generally only go there once a day to check, feed the dogs. And that's, I might add in an extra dog or 2 there rather than what I have here at the home ranch, which I can go and see more regularly. It also depends on the group. If I have adult cattle and no calves with them, I might need less dogs in that group than I would, for example, with my sheep. The sheep, everything likes to eat sheep. So you have a lot of pressure from bobcats, lynx, bears, whatever. Everything likes to eat sheep. So they need a little more protection. So there'll be more dogs in with the sheep. So I'm very flexible in my groups. It also depends if I know there's a pack in the area or a coyote den close by, I'll add in the dog and maybe take a dog away from another area just to try and keep the balance a little right so that there's enough dogs to ward off the predators. So the second part of your question, the dogs are initially a deterrent. That's the main job, is to actually just tell the predators, this is my space, my area, stay away. But you have often some very bold predators who test those boundaries and test like where they can go. So, for example, a few years ago, a coyote jumped into the night corral where the sheep are, and my dogs are in that night corral. So the dogs will confront that coyote. It will end up in a confrontation if it comes down to it. That coyote made a really bad life choice at that moment, so he did not make it through. Most of the time, they speak the same language. All canids speak the same language, so they understand things like territory. They understand things about dominance. I'm assuming that coyote was just a young teenager that was just young and dumb, and he paid for it that way. There is a certain amount of protection that I try and build in, because if I'm losing dogs to wolves, right, then my flock becomes very unprotected, because it takes a number of years to have good working dogs. They need to be mature enough to handle a situation. So if I know there's a potential for high conflict, so in 2017, we had a wolf pack den on our ranch. They raised 7 puppies here. And I knew if the dogs were in that same area, it was going to be a conflict. Some wolves might die in a fight, but my dogs would certainly be seriously injured, because wolves just have a lot more aggression than a domesticated dog, of course. And so it was a choice for me where the wolves were denning. I did not need my livestock to be there, so I just shut the gate and waited until those wolves decided to move away, rather than allow for the conflict to actually take place. So it was protectionist on my side to keep my dogs safe, shore up the protection, having those dogs in with the sheep, but not in the exact area where that wolf den was. That was just a choice that I made. I think everyone tries to avoid direct conflicts, because it just, dogs get injured, vet bills are high, things like that. You just kind of don't want to deal with it. But if it comes down to it, yes, the dogs will be confrontational.
So during that time when you had that pack on your land, you didn't lose any cattle or sheep at that point, because you moved them into what you'd consider to be a safer area?
Well, the cows that were calving were only about, I'm talking meters, right? Not in miles and that, but about 300 meters away from where the wolves were. And my sheep were about 500 meters away, but I didn't have them in the direct field adjoining to where the den was. So there was my sheep were in electric fencing. So that is also a deterrent, right? And that was right next door to sort of where the wolves were, but not in the same field. And the cows, what we did with them, the cows that had the youngest calves, we actually moved to one of our pastures that is in the middle of a grain farming area, so no predation problems there. And our cows with the oldest calves stayed closer to where the wolf pack were, just because those calves are stronger, bigger, and can give a pretty good kick if needs be. So we just sorted our groups and put them where we thought, who are the most vulnerable, put them further away, keep the ones that have a better chance of surviving, keep them closer.
And that sorting, that seemed to work. Just sorting them, moving them in different places, and that strategy.
Exactly. Well, we always have to sort our cattle in any case, because we have multiple pastures that we graze. So we sorted, normally we sort on which cows we want put with which bulls. But this time we sorted just simply on age of calves. And it was interesting to see, because we took scat from the wolves to test and see what they were actually eating. And the results came back. They were pretty much eating deer, any ungulates, wild ungulates.
Wow.
The wolf pups were eating a lot of grasshoppers. And so they would run around the fields and eat grasshoppers and things like that. So we knew that they were not focused on the livestock. We didn't want to give them that opportunity, but we knew that they were not focused. We certainly noticed them, like they would go right through the fields where the cows were, but they would just be trotting through and moving along. So it was not, we were watching what they were doing. We had game cameras up. We were monitoring it pretty closely. So yeah, it just, flexibility is what it came down to. I was flexible enough to make those sorts, choose which cows go where, and, handle it in that way.
Incredible.
And similarly with the sheep.
Yeah.
we just would night corral them. So we didn't leave them in a big open field in the middle of the night because we don't need to invite the wolves in to come and eat. So they would graze during the day with all the dogs. Then at night, we'd bring the sheep and the dogs right up close to the yard area, the barn area, and then during the day back out, so that the chances of predation are definitely reduced by having them tighter together and closer to human activity.
It really just seems these are, from what you're saying, these seem like simple, flexible measures that you were able to do on the fly. Were these all methods that, and again, you probably didn't have, like you said, the predation when you were over in Europe that you obviously have now in Canada with the open space and you're really next to the forest. What have you been able to teach any of these strategies to other people and show them how to understand, like you said, rotating the cattle with certain bulls, putting the sheep in a pen at night with the guardian dogs? Are you able to flesh that out for other ranchers and livestock owners to see?
Absolutely. So I've been invited to talk at conferences actually all over the world. So I spoke with a bunch of shepherds in Portugal and Spain, the Mediterranean countries. I've spoken in the Netherlands because they're starting to have an emerging wolf issue. Down in the States, Canada, multiple places. And what I have found is a lot of ranchers always regard, how should you say, the authorities a little bit with skepticism. They feel there's an alternative agenda. And one rancher talking to another rancher that actually understands, like, it's not so easy just to move a herd of cattle out of a big grazing area from one day to the next, right? And, talking to them in that way, there's way more understanding. I always say to them, like, I'm not willing to really debate the merits of whether wolf introduction into Yellowstone was right in the US or not. Like, it's a done deal. We've passed that station. We have to just see what can we do today? What can we do now? Knowing that wolves are in the area, right? So I don't, so often people want to get into that pro-wolf, anti-wolf discussion. And I say, let's just talk livestock. Let's just see what we can do. Because it's a political discussion, you're just never going to win, right? So you might as well just say, wolves are here. We acknowledge that, whether you like it or not, they're here. So let's figure out ways to deal with it. So I've done a couple of webinars as well, and, just explain some of the things that we've implemented here. But I've also picked up some really good ideas on all my travels all over the world to see what other people do. And some of them are not really doable here, but they're ideas. And, everyone can use a good idea, or if you have a lot of protection for livestock is moving into the technology department. So, if you have a young farmer that's really keen on technology, that might excite him, and he might make an app one day that could work really good with, monitoring livestock or whatever you want. So, sharing those ideas is absolutely the way forward. And having that understanding. If you're having predation, it's scary. We are in a small margins business. We might own a lot of land, but, all our money is tied up in the land. So every calf you lose really actually hits you. And you've got to understand that. And when you're talking to people, they get scared. I had somebody that was losing a sheep a day. They only had 100 sheep. So she said, in 3 months' time, I'm going to be out of the sheep business. And, that is frightening for them. No, that was from coyotes, actually.
Coyotes. Okay. Yeah.
And so, understanding their problem and trying to find a practical solution for them today is what they need. They don't need to know, you can get compensation for your dead animals. Well, no, you don't want to lose those animals, right? I'd rather have the live animal than the compensation. So having those kind of discussions is really what really helps. I've also spoken to, we have here, I think it's your ag extension officers there. I've spoken to ag fieldmen, trappers associations, and just saying, there's so many other things we can do before we get to the lethal control, right? And I said, I think it's part of raising livestock to have some of that responsibility to actually implement some of these measures. And they don't necessarily have to be high cost measures. They can be day-to-day management strategies. And, I've found a lot of people are very receptive to having that kind of information because it just makes sense.
So you found a few things that just seemed to work. I mean, simply. And how did you come to these solutions, or were they your first inspired thought, or did you try things previously that didn't work in the context of, your cattle or your sheep being, at the whims of wild predators?
It was a very, how can I put it? It was a thought through process because there are two passions in my life, and that's my ranch and wildlife. And for many ranchers, it's very contradictory, right? Like most ranchers have the opinion the only good wolf is a dead wolf, right? And I'm of the opinion you can't teach a dead wolf anything. So it's kind of contradictory, and I've decided that I want to coexist, right? I feel it's important having these animals on the landscape. So it was for me that decision, like, what do I need to do that I can live according to how I want to live? And that's have my ranch, be successful at that, and have the predators in my area. So, everything is kind of based on that. And a lot of it is just logical, right? Like if there are coyotes next door, well, is that a good idea to actually have your sheep right there? So a lot of it was just sort of an evolution, but some things I've also had to learn, like working with the livestock guardian dogs, figuring out with the wolves. I knew when we had that wolf pack here, I needed maybe a little more wolf experience. I contacted people that were very involved in wolf research and just said to them, how long is it going to take before those pups are going to move off the farm? How long will it take for that female wolf to feel uncomfortable enough to move? So I didn't have enough basic knowledge in wolf behavior. So I reached out to learn about it, right? To learn about the rendezvous sites and what makes that wolf uncomfortable. And everyone also said, like, you're in a very critical position. Things can change from one day to the next. Those wolves can start predating right away. And so, it was a lot of monitoring. And, I was very nervous. Like, man, I've got 7 pups and all these adults. That's a lot of mouths to feed, right? And I have a food source right here. So, it was a little bit of evolution, reading up, sharing ideas, and getting ideas from other people as well.
I mean, when you first came into Canada, you in 2008, you opposed the wolf bounty right away. It seemed, and you were at the forefront of that fight, whether you knew it or not, coming from another country and another continent altogether. Yeah, I bet. I mean, death
threats rolled in. The death threats rolled in.
My goodness.
That's unbelievable.
I mean, what was that? I mean, How was that like for you as you're a newly minted citizen of this country, and you're right in this fight, whether you knew it or not. I mean, what was that like for you to start up a ranch and to be already in the middle of that?
Yeah, it was a little rough. So we were ranching here 2 years already. And of course, you foreigners, right? And people closer to me kind of knew what my sentiments were. And then our local municipal district or county decided that they wanted to help the ranchers and implement this wolf bounty. And I had done enough research to know that bounties just do not work, right? They tried it in Saskatchewan with coyotes, killed 78,000 coyotes, and it did not change one statistic on predation. And if you look worldwide, it's just known that bounties don't work. Systematic killing of like one problem animal works, but not as a species in general. So I felt it was throwing good money after bad, right? You're paying $500 for a dead wolf, right? And nobody's actually, only the people shooting those wolves are gaining that money, but the ranchers are not actually being helped with it. You could better spend that money on helping the ranchers implement better fencing, or maybe a range rider during calving times, like specific things that would actually help the ranchers. Not every ranch gets predated on. So, you can really focus where you want to spend that money. But the county saw it more as a like a placebo. If we implement the wolf bounty, then the ranchers will be quiet, right? And, instead of thinking a little bit further and saying, well, is it really a good way to spend money? So now we are, I think the county, I'm not exactly sure on statistics, but we're like 800 dead wolves later in, I think it was 4 years' time. And, predation numbers are back to where they were. And, you see an initial drop in predator numbers. But what we did see is our elk numbers exploded. Elk predation of hay, and grain, is a huge issue as well. So ungulate predation. So now, the cattle farmers maybe have less wolves to deal with, but all the grain farmers and all the hay producers are dealing with massive numbers of elk and deer that are coming in and eating their hay and their crop. So, it's not a win-win situation. It's not a good situation all around. So we had a very contentious meeting at a town hall meeting, and I was the only one that stood up and opposed the wolf bounty in our county, and everyone else was for it. So I knew I'd lost that battle, right? They were going to vote it in and run that program. But I thought, even though I knew I was on the losing end, I thought I'm still going to stand up and say what I thought needed to be said. And it was really interesting because after that, I had a number of ranchers coming to me and they said, well, they were a bit nervous to say something, but they really sort of supported what I said. Fish and Wildlife came to me and they said, we fully agree with what you said, but we were not allowed to speak at that meeting. And I think having those one-on-one conversations, you just can reach people that way. And I think a lot of them now realize that it wasn't the utopia that they thought it was going to be.
Yeah, and I assume the bounty doesn't increase tolerance, which is the real solution to this long term is that folks can become somehow more prepared to coexist, so the tolerance goes up. But the bounty and the depredation reimbursements or whatever that's called, reimbursed for lost cattle, that hasn't been affecting tolerance here. Has tolerance gone up because of either of those policies in Alberta?
No. So there's actually some interesting statistics that the tolerance is actually higher in places where the wolf was never extirpated in the first place, right? So the majority of Canadian ranchers are actually fairly tolerant. Like they'll shoot a wolf if they can, just because that's what they do. But it's not that they crazy intolerant about it. I must say, I think the intolerance is way higher in the States. The resistance to having wolves around is way higher. Here it's more like we have wolves and, they're a pain in the butt. And if I can get an opportunity, I'll take a shot at it. But it's not quite as hot topic as it is down in the States.
So we've come to that conclusion that not all, you were mentioning this a minute ago, that not all ranches are being targeted by wolves at the same rate, but some are, disproportionately targeted. Has there been any research in Alberta pointing to, a rhyme or reason for certain selection processes amongst packs, why certain ranches are more appealing, or is it just proximity to current, wolf pack territories?
Yes, there's actually has been some research. So the number one influencer for predators to actually start predating on a flock is improper carcass disposal. So ranchers who don't clean up their dead cows or don't clean up their dead sheep are actually inviting predators in. And when you're feeding these predators with dead stock, right? So they don't go away so far. They don't follow the elk around. They kind of stay put. They become lazy, right? So what happens is you're feeding, indirectly feeding them on these carcasses. So they get into a better body condition. So they start producing more pups. So you have an unnatural higher predator density on your place that is sort of not representative of what it is just in the wilds, right? Where they're living off wild animals. So you're sort of creating your own problem. So one of the big things is just disposing of carcasses, cleaning up afterbirth dead animals, whatever, and disposing of them in such a way that these predators cannot come and scavenge on them. There's research that shows that bears, if they come and eat, for example, dead sheep at your place, that same bear will come back to your farm for up to 8 years later to come looking for food. So they have such a memory of where they can find food. So you get away with it once, and maybe the next 8 years, you're going to have that bear coming back looking for food at your place, right? And it's exactly the same with wolves and things like that. So, that is one big point. Like, farms that are getting predated on maybe are not cleaning up dead stock. The other thing is, of course, proximity to bush lines, water courses, things like that. Now, you can't change a water course and you can't change like where you're actually farming. But what we've done is we put our fences a little bit away from the bush line so that the predators have to come from a bush line through an open area before they get to the livestock, right? It just makes them nervous. They don't want to be out in the open because who knows who's going to take a pot shot at them. So that's another thing. What you find is on big range operations, you tend to have more problems just because the cattle spread out over hundreds and thousands of acres of land. They're not tightly bunched up together. It's just harder for you to manage. You don't know you're having a predation problem until maybe months later, and then you've set in such a pattern of predation. People who often work off the farm because they need the off-farm job maybe only check the cows once or twice a week, once every 2 weeks. So there again, those places tend to have higher predator problems just because they're not on the ball. They're not seeing that, oh, we lost a calf today, I found, the remains or whatever. And they're not quick enough to react. So, with all kinds of problems with predation, it's easier to stop it before it starts than deal with it once it starts.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, we just had Matt Barnes on the last episode, and a lot of the measures that you are putting in place or have been putting in place for over a decade here, he's trying to put those methods into the West, in the Wyomings and the Colorados and the Montanas, where they're trying to get these herds to act like natural herds, like a natural buffalo herd or an ungulate herd, where they can circle up and drive off predators, and teaching these other coexistence methods. Is that, I know you have more sheep than cattle, is that a practice that you have seen work up in Canada where the herds act a little bit more naturally, that they can, not necessarily sheep, but cattle can drive off a predator as they can sort of, I think he said mob up and drive off, whether it's a coyote or a bear or things like that? Or is it still where the cattle are just strewn across the landscape and they're sort of left to their own devices?
Yeah. That's a difficult one because you have to start selecting on maternal properties in cows. And most ranchers don't want to deal with a gnarly cow that wants to kill them as well, right? So it's a compromise, right? Are you going to have nice natured cows that are gentle to handle for yourself, or do you want those nasty old cows that are willing to run down a bear, right? So somewhere in the middle, there's a compromise maybe. So you might lose on maternal on one side. I know because it's my daughter and I handling these cattle that I don't want cows that are going to put me over the fence, right? So I look for a cow that I can handle more gently or easier, but I want her to be fanatical about her calf. I want her to absolutely love her calf to bits so she can really protect it, right? So there's a bit of a compromise there in what are you selecting for. I don't think any domesticated animal will ever be quite as aggressive as your bison. I just don't think that that's not domestication, right? We domesticate by taming animals up.
Right. You can handle them.
Yeah, I do think it is important working in bunches. So when your cattle at the end of the day, if you have the opportunity to bunch them up, bed them down where they're going to spend the night, it definitely helps. Wolves like the animals, the stragglers. They like the ones that wander away from the group, right? Because that's easy for them. it's a lot harder for a wolf to go into a bigger group or herd or flock and separate one out from that without causing a lot of commotion. So, that kind of bunching up works well, but it's very intensive, right? You've got to be out there on your horse, gathering them up, keeping them together, training them to stay together. So that is one. Not everybody's going to do it because it's so time consuming and most ranchers just don't have that kind of time. So I'm not sure if that strategy would be a good strategy to work with. But what I've found, for example, with our cows is because we have those guardian dogs living with them, our cows really know how to handle canines, right? So if a wolf comes trotting by our cows never panic because they're so used to big dogs living in amongst them that they just are calm. So a wolf wants to make like a mock charge, split the herd, separate one off, and then chase it down and go and kill it somewhere. But our cows don't really split off and run away because they don't get panicky from that wolf making that mock charge at them, right? They are so used to big dogs around them, dealing with them, that a wolf has to be like run right up to their cow and really grab its leg or neck, whatever it wants to grab, its flank, before, it's really going to run. So it's a different kind of training, but I find that our cattle, our sheep are way calmer. They don't panic, and predators rely a little bit on panic to be able to separate an animal out.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to when you came here and you opposed the wolf bounty, because I had a name here. What's the relationship that you have with Joe Englehart? I know I read an article. It was probably a few years old at this point, but it seems as though you both came to a compromise where I think he still believes in. I don't think you guys see eye to eye on most things, but you seem like you have an unlikely partnership, I would say, is how I would put it. Is that accurate? And like, how did that all begin?
Yeah. So I met Joe actually in person because he and I were invited to give a session on sustainable ranching at the Williams Lake University. So we had like some of the biggest ranchers in BC, British Columbia, coming and attending a sustainable ranching course. And our topics his was, how he manages his cattle herds that he looks after, and my perspective from being a sheep and cattle rancher on a smaller scale and what we do. So that's where we met. And we see eye to eye on the fact that, we have to manage our animals in such a way. We can't control what the wolves do, but we can control what our livestock do. We share a lot of things the same in how we view things. We're friends. He is very good at what he does. And I think he is kind of a pioneer, running his grazing reserve where he is, and how he manages his cattle. And I think it's a very balanced perspective that he has on, ranching with wolves in his area.
Are ranchers in Alberta using any other alternative tools like flashing lights, flags, alarms, or what some folks might call wolf hazing?
There is. I actually use flashing alarms to keep elk away from my hay. So that is one of the things. So you do see, like, especially smaller hobby farms. I know I gave a talk in Oregon where they were like on the coastal side of Oregon, and they were having a lot of smaller farmers, smaller homesteads, and they were doing things like fox lights and sound boxes and things like that. And that all is okay, with the understanding that all predators will habituate to those devices. So you have to also be very proactive in moving them around, changing where they are, changing the type of flashing that they do, the type of sounds that it emits. The elk habituated to the sounds here within about 4 days. They kind of got used to the sound, and then it was not a deterrent anymore. So it is a help, but you've got to manage it as well. You can't rely solely on it. And if you have a small sheep herd and you can lock them up at night, and you can put some flashing lights out if needs be, in an orchard or whatever. They're definitely tools. It's maybe not the best tool, but they're definitely tools. And I think that's the most important thing. You've got to have a toolbox full of tools and try different things at different times and switch things around. And that's sort of the only way to not stay ahead of the game, but to be effective.
In a more summarized way, if you were teaching a course on predator-friendly ranching, what would be the bullet points of that curriculum? Like, what does it mean? What does it mean to be successful at that in kind of a bullet point sort of way that anyone can digest?
Okay, let me just think about that for a minute, because man, that takes usually a whole day to
no, take your time. But you're describing
that.
It, and probably we can assume. But I'm just curious, what would mean that a ranch gets that award they can put up on the wall? This is a predator-friendly ranch.
Okay, so there's actually an organization that quantifies exactly what you need to comply with. So it's Wildlife Friendly Organization, and they have a whole lot of criteria that you have to abide by. And if you get audited and they feel that you are doing it in such a way, then you can get that label that you can use to label your products to sell. I actually don't believe very much in labeling. So to me, the only reason why I chose to do that certification is because it sounds so strange, predator-friendly ranching. And to me, it was a way to open up a conversation. Somebody would say like, oh, what does it mean? Tell me more about it. And it was like an opening of a conversation point for me, and having that opportunity to speak to more people about what we do. Where I live, I have no products that I could actually label and sell at a higher price. I live so far from any big urban centers. I don't have a market on my doorstep. Labeling like that would work if you were outside of Denver or outside of a big city, right? And, you can promote your product in such a way. I think that it's like Organic, fair trade and all of those kind of organizations, right? Yeah, I think, there's a place for it. There's a market for it. It was not for me, the market side of things. It was more having that conversation that somebody can say, well, tell me what you do. And if I can explain what we do here and they can implement some. And for them, it's so that they don't lose any more livestock, but it's a bonus for the wolves that they might not get shot then, right? So to me, that is the reason why we got that certification.
Everything you've said comes from such a balanced and informational perspective and a future-looking perspective. It seems as though you're always a step or two ahead of what the problem may be, and what you just said, it seems that way. Is that you get the label again, like you said, not for the economic value, but really for the speaking value and the communication value of what that may bring. Do you find that, because we were talking about, obviously, governments are giving money for predation if you lose a sheep or a cattle, things like that. Do you think, in your opinion, that could be something, as you just said, if you get the label or the sticker, whatever it is, for predator-friendly, wildlife-friendly, that could be some sort of a compensation that ranchers or livestock owners might want to have for themselves. So it could be something that they work towards.
Like there's an incentive.
There's an incentive for that way. So it's not just monetary, and you can have this collective group of individuals that do it.
Yes and no. I think it's a niche market, right? I think some people can absolutely do it. And it's usually people that are the smaller livestock keepers that can go to a farmer's market, promote the product, use the label in that way. If you're going to use it, for example, for me, I would have to really go into the marketing of the livestock, right? And that's a whole different section, or marketing of the product, not the livestock, should I say, marketing of the product. And that's a whole different business side, right? I don't think it works for everyone. I don't think it might work, for example, in Africa, where the people are not getting a fair deal in a lot of things. It might be an incentive to work that way. I truly believe the incentive to want to be wildlife friendly or predator friendly will never hinge on the product, but it will hinge on your own belief system. You either want to coexist or you don't. You either want to manage your livestock in such a way that you reduce losses, or you don't care, right? Or you want to blame the government for introducing wolves and you're really opposed to them. So, why do you want to try and get a certification? Why do you want to try and do something better? Because the government put a problem onto you. So, I do think for some people it is, but it's more your direct marketers, your niche market, things like that. I think people running, a big cattle operation in Oklahoma with a couple of thousand head of cattle, I don't think it'll work really for them. But it does give a bit of a spirit to the operation, right? This is what we strive for in our operation, right? And it's like a core value. And to me, that is the most important. For me, my core value is I want to see predators. I want to see ungulates. I want to see all the wildlife in my area, and I want to farm here. And that is my driving force in there, yeah. And the one I can manage and the other one I can't. I can't manage the wildlife, but I can manage my livestock.
It isn't, and there's some beauty in that though, right? Like, I mean, I think when there's money involved, it's easy to forget that there's some beauty in that wildlife isn't being managed, and it's, that there's a place for both to happen in the same arena, and for everyone to be successful.
Exactly. And I must say, every day I've got a couple of foxes in the yard at the moment. And every day when I see them, I enjoy it. I like seeing them there. And if I drive by and I happen to catch a glimpse of a wolf, I like it. It really makes me excited to see it. So, that's just, as I said, it's maybe an idealism. And that's what I've focused myself on. And it's been with me since I was a child. I've always loved wildlife. So I just knew it was not a compromisable value.
Yeah, it really seems that it's been with you for your entire life. And the fact that you came into this whole venture, even when you were in Europe, that you wanted wildlife as part of your ranching life is evident through everything that you do. What do you think the best way to get these methods and messaging out? Is it you going to all these conferences that you go to? What have you found over the years as you've learned, grown, done your own research, and communicated with all these different individuals and groups that really is able to get the message across as cleanly as possible?
Yes, I definitely think speaking at like conferences, like this kind of podcast, seminars, whatever, those kind of things, you really do have your biggest reach, because a lot of people are just a little fearful, right? They're fearful for what could happen, what could go wrong, things like that. And you can actually reassure them that there's plenty you can do, so that, it doesn't have to be a problem you need to fear, right? You just need to understand it and work with it. So I do think speaking to people on these kind of levels absolutely helps. Being one of them is also, of course, a big advantage. You're not just the scientist that's coming to say, you need to do this or you need to do that, because most ranchers don't like to be told what they have to do, right? But we can suggest it. And, and some people you always have pioneers in any industry, right? So your front runners are going to adopt new things and try things, and the rest of the group are only going to adopt them years later, right? So the pioneers are the ones that are testing the technology, trying the flattery, trying this, trying that to see if it's going to work. And that gives all the others the information to move forward. But I do think people just need to understand that other people are out there and willing to help. The lady that I told you about with her 100 sheep and losing a sheep a day, she was in absolute despair. And I loaned her one of my guard dogs. And I said, I don't need him right now. You can borrow him. And her problem stopped the very next day.
Wow.
And she just about worshipped the ground that the dog walked on. And then I thought to myself, that is what people need. They need a solution, right? They don't need to be told what to do. They need a solution at this moment. And I provided her with a solution by loaning her my dog. She drove 3 hours up to come and pick up the dog. She said her problem stopped that day. And then I thought to myself, I do believe that that is the way forward, that we have to be able to help people. And I saw that in Switzerland, and they had a really good program there. And that is something I would love to implement one day. Is in Switzerland, what they had is what they called like an emergency response team. So somebody got predated on and they called, and about 3 or 4 people went to that shepherd and provided them with information. They came with guardian dogs. They taught them how to put up good fencing, electric fencing, whatever needed. They helped for 3 or 4 days that shepherd to manage the flock and give him the skills or the peace of mind that it would be okay, right? That we can do this. And just having a group of educated people that can come in and just say, we'll work with you, because there's nothing worse than cleaning up a sheep that's been predated on all by yourself, wondering, what's going to stop this? What can I do? And having a skilled set of people, teaching them about how to use guardian dogs, maybe herding dogs, put up fencing, using those flashing lights temporarily, all these different strategies, the people didn't feel so alone. And predation is actually a human problem, right? It's not a problem for the predator. It's a problem for the livestock. But it's primarily a human problem and an attitude problem. And if we can extend help in such a way, then that goes a whole lot further. And I think that is how you buy tolerance. And that is how you buy support, because not like a bounty where you just pay money to anyone who happens to shoot a wolf or a trapper that traps wolves for his living, right? Here you're giving specific help to that specific person, whether it's just camping out with their cows for a few nights that the farmer can get or a rancher can get a couple of hours of sleep, right? It might be as simple as that, knowing that somebody's out there helping him look after his problem. And, I think that that's kind of the way forward. And, it's a community thing, right? You want all the ranchers to do well. You want your community to do well. So what can we do to help them? And not be too judgmental. Just say, how about we do this, or how about we do that? Do you need a dog? I can raise up a dog for you. And, in a year's time, it'll be good to go, and things like that. So I think that's the way to think moving forward.
I live on a small ranch. It's not a big operation like yours. We have 12 cows maybe in the backyard. It's a small herd. But it's easy to miss that unless you live in a place like this where you are seeing people raise their cattle and their connection to this process, that losing animals like that is going to be tough on multiple levels. It's not solely a matter of money and hating wolves.
No.
It's a matter of history and family and future and passing on businesses and land and livelihood and skills down to your children or your spouse or whatever. There's a lot tied to this way of life that actually everyone can relate to. It's hard to see that it's hard to see it, in the same way that watching wolves. We've heard about wolf watchers bringing their kids to do this for the first time and watching them light up. And then they take on a pathway of conservation and biology or whatever it is. And they're passing on these interests and their passion to their kids. And it's easy to miss that that's what's also happening here. And a lot of times that's the problem with losing animals, is you're watching all of this kind of be dwindled away over time. And it's not really that it's wolves doing it. It's that it's happening. So, we need to give people the technology and prepare them for these types of challenges, whatever that means. And I don't know who's responsible for that. I think it's all of us, but we just got to get the information out so that folks can be as prepared as possible so that they can have that same luxury of passing these things down and living their version of whatever their dream is. It's important.
Well, exactly. And I think that's also part of it. There are plenty of people that want to see wolves. Well, actually, like city people and that, they want wolves. They just don't live with them in their backyard, right? So they don't always necessarily understand all those challenges. And, if it's your kids and it's their pet sheep that happens to be killed, and it's always the pet sheep that gets killed. It's never the one that you really don't like, right? So, dealing with all of that. And that's why I just feel it certainly is a human problem. It is always a challenge. How do you reach people, right? And on every side, it's always tied to emotions, right? So the person who sees a wolf for the first time in their life, it's a highly emotional experience, right? It's exciting, it's awe-inspiring, right? The rancher sees the dead calf and it's emotional. He's dealing with shock and sadness and, the financial loss, things like that. And how do you balance all these people's emotions, right? So you have to just have strategies in place to help the people on this side. And, as much as I'm opposed to killing wolves, there is very now and then, and it's rare, but there are occasions where it's going to happen, right? You have livestock, you have dead stock. They're going to be live wolves and they're going to be dead wolves, whether they're hit by a car or shot by a hunter. It's going to happen. And, it's about trying to find that middle ground and trying to find that, get away from the emotions a little bit, be able to take that step back and just see it for what it is.
You walk that line beautifully. And I think that's one thing that it's the main reason of why Stephen and I interview the people that we interview, and we try to get all the perspectives, is that, like you said, Louise, is the emotional aspect of this has been running through a lot of our ancestors and our current people for hundreds and hundreds of, probably if not thousands of years, probably hundreds of years. And just the way that wolves have infiltrated the way that we think culturally, societally, economically, just it factors into everything, especially individuals like yourself that are on the landscape, literally on the landscape and trying to make a living. And I think that's a huge point that you made there, is that it has to be away from emotion and more into strategy and forward thinking.
Exactly. And that's my main thing. When I start a lecture, usually, like, some people just want to get into the debate right away. Those Alberta and BC wolves that came to Yellowstone, and it's like, man, that's 20 years ago, right? Like, it's
done.
It's really, I wasn't there when it happened.
Yeah,
I supported it indirectly, but, we're beyond that point. And it's the same with the Colorado wolves now, right? They're filtering in very small margins in the voting of whether to, go with wolves or not. So it's a very emotional debate, very charged, right? And I just think, like, we just need to not have that debate because it gets nobody anywhere. Let's just talk about what can we do. We need solutions,
It's the logical next step is just to think about the future and what to do from here. Because, I mean, whether we like it or we don't like it or we're for it or against it, once they're reintroduced here, I mean, New Mexico has wolves, Colorado's got wolves, Wyoming's got wolves, Montana's got wolves, Canada's got wolves. It's done. The reintroduction was successful, really. I mean, it's been largely successful. So now it's about trying to think of what to do next.
Exactly. And, that's where we're at. But most farmers want to go back to that discussion, like, should it have happened? And it's a station, we've passed that one. So we might as well deal with what we have in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Louise, give everybody, tell them your website where they can see the work that you're doing on your ranch. Do you have any speaking engagements coming up? Anything going on? I know I think it seems like we're finally in the era of somewhat post-COVID where people are able to travel again and things like that. So do you have anything coming up?
It's coming back, though. They say it's coming back.
It's coming back.
It's already out. They said it's the new Omicron B2, some new thing is coming back.
Well, in the light of positivity, I'm going to say that we're moving. Hopefully, we're moving towards that way. But anyway, give us your info, your websites, and if you have anything coming up where people can actually see you in person and talk to you, if that's coming down the pike.
Yeah. So I think the easiest way to find me is through my website, which is www.grazery.com. And I also have a blog on Google, so on Blogger, and it's called Predator Friendly Ranching. I primarily post things about livestock guardian dogs and working with guardian dogs on that blog. I have been asked to speak at the Nebraska Goat Conference, I think it is. I'm not yet sure of the
Goat Conference.
Yeah, or one of their meetings. I'm not exactly sure. I think it's going to just be a Zoom meeting. So that is coming up. I actually did a Zoom meeting last night for some people here, and I've got a speaking event in 2 weeks' time, all up here in Canada. I don't have anything else in the planning right now, also because we're just getting to that post-COVID kind of stage. So, hopefully things will open up a little bit.
round 3.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see how that goes. I am very open to talk to people directly, right? So, I mean, if somebody finds me on Facebook, I have a public Facebook page, just my name, Louise Liebenberg. A lot of people private message me. I know I just recently got messaged by somebody that manages 6 ranches down in the States, and they wanting to move to a more predator-friendly situation. So,
that's amazing.
Wow, that's awesome.
We have personal communications, we email up and down. I am fairly busy with my own ranch, so sometimes it takes me a couple of days to respond or get back. But other than that, it's, I welcome talking to people where I can and helping them where I can. And if people are having very specific problems, I certainly don't mind jumping in. And I have quite a network of people on all sides that, if I can't help them, I can often refer them to somebody else who can. So, that's kind of my approach at the moment.
It's a wonderful approach. Yeah, the approach is great. My final question for you, Louise, is when you hear the word wolf, what is the one thing that comes to your mind?
It belongs. It belongs here. That's, yeah. I mean, I admire them, right, for being wild and being free and all the adjectives that you can describe wolves with. But I think they just belong here. We need them. They're ecologically important. They're biologically important. So they belong. We belong. Our cows belong.
Absolutely. Yeah. You are an asset up and down the ranching community, the wolf community. So it was great to finally meet you. And it was just, I can't thank Raymond enough for the recommendation to talk to you. And we will, again, those of you that are listening, go to the description. We'll have we'll have Louise's website in there so you guys can take a look at what she does. It's awesome stuff. And if you're in Canada and you're in the Alberta area, if she's speaking, give a listen to her. She's all the information is pertinent. It's right up to it. And this is the stuff we need to be doing. So, Louise
Super
Liebenberg, cool. Yeah, thank you so much for joining Stephen and I and just doing what you do. Really appreciate it.
And I thank you for inviting me to speak here. And I think you have a very interesting podcast. You've had really good speakers around, which is also heartwarming to see because, it is important to share other people's stories and things like that. So I appreciate the work you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate you. How's to everybody out there, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye, everybody.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the Donate tab, and find out more information.